In this chapter, we're going to look at encryption overview, symmetric encryption, asymmetric encryption, hashing, hybrid encryption, advanced encryption methods, as well as attack vectors. Encryption has actually been around throughout history. The Egyptians used the hieroglyphics, the Caesar used substitution ciphers, Spartans even used a skytele, or skytele, however you want to pronounce it, that was actually a thin sheet wrapped around a stick, effectively. And if we were to look at that, let me hold on. Here on Wikipedia, it actually shows a picture, and we can see that the rod has to be the correct diameter, otherwise the letters will not line up, and that would be very important for you to get the secret message. Of course, systems have become more complex. We have evolved with this, and when we apply this to computers, we think of IPsec, PKI, public key infrastructure, quantum cryptography, pretty good privacy, elliptic curve, just a whole lot of different ones we see in modern computing. And because we want to keep our information safe, there's a very much a need to encrypt a lot of our information. Encryption transforms information that may start out looking as if it were plain text, and then making it in an unreadable format, so those that do not have the decryption key or keys would not know how to read the information. They wouldn't be able to read the information. So the idea of encryption is it's considered to be a reversible process if you have the right key and algorithm. And the idea is you can encrypt the information and then decrypt it to reverse it, which is unlike the concept of hashing. With hashing, you think of it as being a one-way process. It's easy to break the glass window, but very difficult to put it back together. That would be more hashing. Now, we still complement encryption with integrity and authenticity. We start thinking of methods of message authentication code, as well as digital signatures, which can help make up for what just simple encryption and confidentiality would not accomplish. With cryptanalysis, we're looking at the science of studying and breaking encryption mechanisms. We have hackers that are doing this in an ethical way called white hat, and hackers that are doing this in a more evil way to get into information that they shouldn't be looking at to begin with, and that's considered a black hat. Then there's cryptology, and the idea of actually studying cryptography and cryptanalysis, where you're trying to break the encryption. Key clustering is where you have two different keys generating the same resulting ciphertext, which is the encrypted version from the exact same initial plain text, which would be obviously very unusual for that to happen. With the science of secret communication, we have cryptology, and first of all, we could look at breaking the encryption cryptanalysis. We could look at trying to disguise what we have, hide our information into a sort of a garbled format, cryptography. And steganography is actually generally included in chapters like these, but it's not really encryption. There is no encryption whatsoever with steganography. It's more of concealing. As we'll study this chapter, we're going to see there's symmetric and asymmetric encryption. With symmetric, it only uses one key for the encryption and the decryption. And we'll see transposition versus substitution ciphers, as well as a two-key system with public and private keys. And this is called asymmetric, where it uses Diffie-Hellman elliptic curve, Elgamal, and RSA. Now, looking at encryption algorithms, the idea is to take plain text and turn this into something that looks unreadable to most, and of course you would have to have the decryption key to actually make it meaningful and put it back into its original format. Now, with the encryption, if we look at symmetric is a one-key system. We have block and stream ciphers. The block ciphers are of some sort of fixed length. You'll hear words like 64-bit, 128-bit, 256-bit. And of course, some examples of that, we could see the original data encryption standard, which we would no longer use. The National Institute of Standards and Technology actually approved this initially, but as time has gone by, we found that that was not sufficient. And that's pretty typical with encryption. We may find that one particular encryption algorithm appears to be great, and then over time, with better computers, better technology, we find that it's no longer sufficient. So then we went 1980s, we're talking about triple DES. And then, of course, there were some others that have come along, RC2, RC5, and so on. And these would all be, again, block ciphers. And there's many more we'll look at with the concept of a block at a time, 64-bit, 128, and so on. The stream ciphers are still considered symmetric, but the idea is to encrypt 1 bit at a time. And a good example of a stream cipher would be RC4, which we see used in WEP encryption for wireless, and actually WPA as well. And the idea of the stream ciphers is they do execute at a faster speed, a higher speed than your block ciphers, and less complexity. Looking at symmetric, symmetric has its place. Within symmetric, we think of encryption and decryption, we think of confidentiality. We really don't think of anything beyond that. Anything beyond that would really be asymmetric. And with the symmetric, again, there is one key to do encryption, one to do decryption. And the idea is this key would need to be shared with whoever I want to decrypt what I send them. So if I encrypt a document and I want you to be able to decrypt that document, I must get that key to you. Now, symmetric is known for being quite fast because they're so simple. I think that's the magic behind it. There's not a whole lot of computation happening with this. It's not near as complicated, some of the asymmetric type algorithms. So with the simplicity of just simply maintaining confidentiality, this can be super fast. So symmetric encryption can be really wonderful for encrypting large amounts of information such as your hard drive. Now there are issues with this. How do we get the symmetric key shared with our friend that we wish to do the decryption with? We would have to look at how we're going to share this. We could use something like SneakerNet and actually get on our sneakers and walk over to them and bring it to them. But of course, you will find as we go through this chapter that when we get to asymmetric will solve the problem of this key being distributed, because we can actually use the asymmetric techniques to encrypt the symmetric key or the shared secret key, and then it can be distributed safely. Of course, WEP is word equivalent privacy. It's a very super limited these days wireless encryption that was based on a symmetric encryption called RC4. Now again, we may consider this to be a weakness, the fact that we have to find a way to get the key to its destination, but generally this is solved by using the asymmetric methods, which would encrypt the symmetric key or the shared key. If we strictly stayed in a symmetric world, we would end up with a large amount of keys. It would grow to a point where it was really unmanageable. Now we can use symmetric for many things, but it really, if a lot of people are involved in this, it could become quite cumbersome. Also remember that symmetric does not give you anything except confidentiality. No authenticity, no non-repudiation. We'll see that later. As far as some of the popular symmetric algorithms, we started out early on with DES, and you can see it's actually a 64-bit block size, a 56-bit key. And then there was a jump to triple DES. Triple DES is still actually using the same block size, but actually it's doing the operation 3 times, so it makes it more secure. With the advanced encryption standard, the block size can vary at least 128 bits and up. When you start looking at the key sizes, 128, 192, 256. So, and also when you look at the creators of AES, the 2 creators, we put their names together, you get Rindell algorithm. So many places you'll just simply see Rindell and not AES. Some are of less popularity. We have International Data Encryption Algorithm, IDEA, you don't really hear that one. CAST 128, we don't really hear that one so much. RC5, we can see the numbers on that, 3264, 1280 to 2048. and of course the fish, blowfish and twofish. And of course, blowfish has gotten special attention, I think, because of the variable block size and the way that the key lengths are not fixed, anywhere from 1 to 448. So as you look at this, there's actually quite a few symmetric algorithms. DES was good at one time, again, data encryption standard. And it's not something you would really use these days because it does have a small key length, and it was replaced. I mean, it went through DES to triple DES to advanced encryption standard, and the key lengths are actually much higher. So at one time, DES seemed like a good idea, but of course, why not use something better, which would be more difficult to crack. Now, moving on to the asymmetric world. The asymmetric uses private and public keys, and you keep your private key private. Public key could potentially be published to a system where people can get to this, or it could be exchanged in some other way. But generally, the public key, I find, is made available to the users that need to get access to it. It would not be unusual for the individual users to publish their public key to some sort of system, maybe a global access list or something, some sort of system that would actually have that, and whenever you need to get the public key for someone else, you can do that. And depending on what they're trying to accomplish, you use one key to encrypt and the other key to decrypt. They are mathematically related, but you cannot derive one from the other. Always keep the private key private and secret, and the public key can be distributed. That's not a problem. And there are quite a few, or not quite a few, about 4 popular ones when it comes to the asymmetric world. And the asymmetric one you may have heard of is Diffie-Hellman. We have RSA. There's several here. Now, Diffie-Hellman is probably known for the key exchange. The RSA goes back to Rivest, Shamir, and Alderman, and it was based on factoring large prime numbers. So, Ronald Rivest, Leonard Alderman, and Adi Shamir. So, professors at MIT, and basically these have quite a history, as you can see. Now, the asymmetric made up for some of the weaknesses with the symmetric. Now, one nice thing is with the asymmetric, you actually end up with less keys. If you worked out the symmetric, you end up with way more keys to manage than the asymmetric. Because the asymmetric, if you have 1,000 users, is 2,000. You just basically double it. So it's much more manageable. And with this, when it comes to dealing with the keys, we don't have to worry about how to distribute the keys because we have the concept of public and private. So with that, the public key is made available. It doesn't need the protection. The private key is kept private. So when they say out of band, we don't have to use something outside of the conventional network to distribute the information. If you're in band, you actually use your network to communicate. Out of band, you would have to find a method outside of that, maybe just manually taking the key to whoever needs your key. So asymmetric has it covered. Now, of course, asymmetric does give you some of the things we were missing in symmetric. You have the authenticity and the non-repudiation. Non-repudiation, we think of digital signatures. Now, there is really some bad sides to it, but it's not like we're going to get rid of it. The asymmetric is quite a bit slower than symmetric. So whenever you see asymmetric in action, it's actually going to be encrypting key information, not large amounts of information. You'll see symmetric maybe encrypting an entire hard drive, but you'll see asymmetric perhaps encrypting the symmetric key or the shared key, which would be symmetric. So it works out as long as you don't try to use asymmetric to encrypt a large amount of information. So it shouldn't really be a problem because we have symmetric. It's not like we're going to dispose of either method. They both have their place. The asymmetric being 1,000 times slower, we certainly wouldn't use it to encrypt a large amount of information. So it works out for what its purpose is. As far as some of the well-known ones, we do have the Diffie-Hellman, elliptic curve, Gamal, RSA, and knapsack. I would say if you were to ignore knapsack and just spell out the word deer, D-E-E-R, those would probably be the most popular ones. That's why I said it in that order. The Diffie-Hellman was really first, and then we see a lot of aspects pulled into the RSA, and elliptic curve has its place. Elgamal doesn't really take a lot of attention. We don't really hear much about Elgamal or knapsack for that matter. Now, when you think of asymmetric, you do generally think of key exchange, because that was actually the problem that the symmetric world had. How do we distribute the key? Because with the symmetric, we had a single key, a shared key, that needed to be used by the one doing the encrypting, and the one who would receive the encrypted information need to decrypt it, to reverse it. So as I told you, the asymmetric world, which we're in now, has several different algorithms that could take care of this. They actually could take care of the exchanging of that symmetric or so-called shared key. Diffie-Hellman was known for being a key exchange algorithm, and even if the two parties that were communicating had never had contact before, they could still take care of establishing a shared secret key over insecure communications. It really wasn't a problem. And so this key can then be used to encrypt communications using a symmetric key cipher. So the Diffie-Hellman took care of the key distribution problem. Elgamal was based upon the Diffie-Hellman. And again, the asymmetric methods are good for their purpose, to encrypt small amounts of information. And of course, the RSA is quite famous when you think about some of the RSA-based devices. If we wanted to look at an example of something based off of RSA, which is the asymmetric encryption, we can think of RSA Secure ID. It comes in many different forms. Okay, could be a device like this. It could look more like a credit card. Look at some of the different options here. It could actually be part of your software. But the idea of the RSA device, based on the RSA encryption, is the fact that it presents you with a number, and when you go to do your login, you're actually using that number on your screen. Now realize that that number, get a little better look at this, that number will change about every 60 seconds, so that can really be helpful to stop someone from shoulder surfing, writing down your number and thinking they've got something super special. Now, comparing symmetric versus asymmetric. Symmetric actually, again, is one key. And we have to find a way to get that key shared between the other person that you wish to decrypt what you send them. But again, that's taken care of with the asymmetric. That's pretty typical. So initially they say that symmetric would have to use another method outside of just going through the internet, which would be called in-band. We have to use something out of band. I find another method to get that information to the recipient. We know that the symmetric is super simple, less complex, and quite a bit faster. And as far as the symmetric methods, the keys do grow very quickly compared to asymmetric. You end up having too many keys to really manage for your users if you stayed with pure symmetric. And as far as what is symmetric so good at, I would say bulk encryption. It's able to encrypt a lot of information quite fast. And the number one thing we think of is confidentiality. We encrypt it, it looks garbled, we can't read it, therefore we consider it to be more confidential. Now with the asymmetric, remember it's a public-private key pair. You could have a public-private key pair used for encryption. You could have a public-private key pair used for digital signing. Now in the commercial world, when I talk to people, I don't really hear them usually talk about using digital signing that often and the whole idea of public and private key pairs. But when I talk to people that are part of the government or military, this is a way of life. They would very commonly digitally sign their emails. They would be involved with what we'll be talking about, a certificate of authority, and have use these public-private key pairs for different purposes. Maybe one pair would be used for digital signing, another pair for encryption. Now, even though we don't see this used as much in the commercial market, it is very much used in the military environment. As far as key exchange, the public key is something that's published where people can get to the public key. The private key is kept private and secret, so there's no problem with distribution of the public key. The algorithms are doing far beyond just encryption. So when you think about this, they're far more complex because they do more, like the authenticity and the non-repudiation. When you start looking at this, the keys just simply double. 1,000 users is 2,000 keys. Why do we use asymmetric? Well, it's multiple reasons, but one thing is to encrypt the symmetric key, our shared key, and to help with the distribution of that key. Plus, it gives you the confidentiality, the authentication, also known as authenticity, and non-repudiation. And I was just kind of thinking about another algorithm. When we're talking about the asymmetric, I would also say that the elliptic curve cryptography one that I kind of went past, that is actually a really nice one too. I mentioned the Diffie-Hellman and the RSA, but the elliptic curve cryptography one, which is asymmetric, can be pretty efficient with your smaller devices. So I expect to see more on that ECC. Who knows, maybe elliptic curve cryptography will at some point replace RSA, or maybe become equally popular. Now, when you use the algorithms together, you've got a pretty good product with this. The sender could use their symmetric key to actually encrypt the message. And then they could use their asymmetric key, which is who you're going to send it to. The receiver's public key could encrypt that symmetric key so you can get it safely to the destination. And both are sent to the destination. Then when the receiver gets this, they could actually use their symmetric key to decrypt the message, and they would have this once they actually decrypted the symmetric key with their own private key. So basically it's like the symmetric key is all packaged up nice and neatly and protected because it was encrypted with the steps with the asymmetric key. So basically the receiver, the asymmetric key, which is the receiver's public key, was used to like package up the symmetric key you're trying to send. So again, when we finally receive that information, now we can use our own private key, because we're the receiver, to decrypt that package, and now it opens up and we see the symmetric key, and then once we have that, it's easy enough to decrypt the message. So it's a matter of a little bit of layering going on, a bit of a hybrid concept here. Now, concerning a tool called cryptool, we can actually, use a file or just type in some text and just kind of show off that there are tools like this to just simply demonstrate the concept of encryption and show that we had some of the so-called classic symmetric ones, which we don't generally hear of so much. There's our Cyteli. And the more modern ones that we think of, and of course you have your DES and your triple DES, and there's your AES and your RC4 and quite a few. I could sit there and say, okay, DES, we're basically encrypt this information, and we have options in here. We could, play with this information and go and use AES. So you got 128-bit, 192, 256, much better. And encrypt. Okay. And just kind of playing with this a little bit. They even have some fun ones to kind of experiment with, even RSA, and kind of a combination of some of the methods. When you're actually looking at the hybrid, you have they're using a little RSA and elliptic curve cryptography along with advanced encryption standard. The RSA and elliptic curve are asymmetric, also known as public key cryptography, and the AES is actually symmetric. So we'll go back to just plain old asymmetric and kind of look at RSA 512, and encrypt. So in real life, this is not something you're necessarily going to do, but it just kind of shows off this tool called cryptool. Okay. So kind of a fun tool that you can download just to sort of mess around with cryptography. and try to understand the variety that we have when it comes to encryption. Now, as far as another topic goes, we have hashing. Hashing is considered to be a one-way process. You're creating a unique string of characters from whatever your source may be. It may be a program, it could be passwords, it could be a hard drive used in digital forensics. And with this, you may have a variable input. In other words, your passwords have different lengths, your executables are different sizes, hard drives are different sizes, and we would hash these different sources, but they would come out with a fixed length result. And with this, the reason we hash is to prove whether we have integrity, primarily, and also secure password authentication is listed here as well. The theory is if you had a glass window and you were to break it, it would be quite easy. But to take the glass window when it's in many pieces and put it back together would be nearly impossible. That's the theory behind hashing. Hash cannot be reversed to plain text. That's the concept. The true reality, if it's a weaker hash, it could be done with the proper hacking tools. But the main thing to think about hashing is it's a one-way process. Okay, and with anything, I mean, we're trying to, a lot of times we talk about penetration testing. We're actually trying to test our systems and see that they are secure and see if there are any vulnerabilities that are in place. Now, as far as the popular hashing algorithms, I'd say MD5, SHA-1, SHA-2. Okay, MD4 was cracked. That was used on local Windows passwords. MD5, we still see MD5 a lot, despite the fact that it has the word cracked by it. We still see it a great deal. You hear it in digital forensics for proving the integrity of a duplicate hard drive that you're doing your investigation on. You hear MD5 for maybe passwords that are saved in a hashed format on a Cisco router, for example, or some sort of what they would call enable secret password, but it's just basically passwords on a Cisco router. And a step up from that, because MD5 is only 128 bits, is obviously SHA-1. SHA-1 jumps you up to 160 bits, so that's good. They mentioned Xbox copy protection, so we're getting better and better. And SHA-2 is just going up higher with the bit count, so you're going to be more secure. So obviously the higher you can go, the better. But the idea, hashing is all about integrity. It does not stop integrity violations. It simply lets you know there was a violation, that there was a problem. Okay. If I was to show you just an example, looking at Cain and Abel. Cain and Abel, let's see if this is going to work this time. Yeah, I've been blocked from that recently. Yeah, my Malwarebytes is blocking me. Hold on. Okay, I went ahead and turned off the blocking of my Cain and Abel website. And Cain and Abel is a password cracker. I mean, it's many things, actually. Cain and Abel is able to recover passwords. And you can see the big list here. Crack encrypted passwords using dictionary brute force, cryptanalysis, record your voice over IP conversations. Let's see, recover wireless network keys, reveal passwords and boxes, and so on. Lots of goodies, but that's not the point. The point of this is to show you that if I wanted this program and I chose to download this program, then I could go ahead and maybe copy and paste whichever one I want to compute, the MD5 or the SHA-1, and actually just get the hash. And then if I were to go to the internet and look for some sort of a hashing program, I can kind of look through them and see which one I'd like to use. If you do the CNET, be careful. CNET's great for tools, but of course they tend to try to install some little extras, so maybe be careful to say no to any sort of extras that you get with this. But there's just a variety of little programs you can do online or even download that could calculate the hash. Now, when you talk to most people, they don't actually say that they bother to do this, but the concept is that you could select a file that you've downloaded, like the Cain and Abel, and then have it calculate the hash to the level you want, SHA-1 or MD5, and it will come up with a string of letters and numbers. And the idea behind that is it should match precisely what we have listed here on this website. And if it does, we trust it and we figure there's good integrity. And we feel that maybe this download is trustworthy and maybe it's not been put with a Trojan horse or a virus or something that could actually cause us harm. So really, with any sort of hashing algorithm, we're using it for an integrity check. So again, in the Linux world, hashing algorithms, or the hash of a program, tends to be listed pretty often. In the Windows world, it doesn't seem to be quite as often, and then even if it is, many people may not calculate it. But if they wish to do some verification on it, it would be a good idea. And there's the birthday attack. And with this, it's basically based on a mathematical paradox. The idea is looking at how many people would have to be in the same room for there to be over a 50% chance that someone has the same birthday as you might. So it's really mathematical likelihoods, statistical likelihoods. And that does relate to the concept of, I guess, more security with cryptography. We see it relating to cryptography in general, hashing, and so on. And really, it makes you think that when you look at hashing algorithms, the longer the message digest value, the better. So in other words, SHA-2 would be better than SHA-1, which would be better than MD5, because you're looking at longer hash values that you can work with it. Now, this is a little bit far-fetched, but the concept is, we've got Bob and Sue. They created this document before they got married, indicated that they would split everything 50-50 if they ever parted. And they put this document through a hashing algorithm, and it created this resulting hash called a message digest. Then Sue gets the idea that she could change this document and where she could get everything after this parting. But the problem was she's got to make it match the original hashed value, the message digest. Now, it is possible but extremely unlikely. It would take a great deal of work to produce the same message digest value from a different input. So she tries to work with the document until she can finally calculate the hash and get the exact same hashed value. If this were to occur, you end up with a so-called collision taking place. So then her thinking is, well, the hash matches, this must be the same basic document. Now here we just kind of look at a little program that just kind of shows off hashing. Here's a demonstration of a generic hash demo. The idea behind this is just to kind of show how it works. And originally I typed in a little message, hello there, this is my message. I'll make another change to it. And then we can actually, just kind of a demonstration, you do see that it changed. Below is a bit level representation of our message. Then step 2, your message contains so many bits, and a given message needs to be a specific number of bits, commonly 448 to 512, and so on. Kind of talks to me about hashes. In this particular one, there was going to be some padded zeros basically put in here. Our particular message, the input value will be all these zeros and so on. And then, of course, I could go here. It's prepared and will be inputted into the heart of the hash algorithm. And we click step 3, and it alters. Now your message could be sent across a vulnerable network, and the receiver of your message could verify your message authenticity by putting it through the same hashing. So this was just meant to be more of a learning project, just to kind of show off what hashing can actually do. And of course that it uses padding techniques for the hashing. And of course this could be downloaded, or you could do a Google search to find this generic hash program called generic hash demo. Also another here one, we're talking about express checksum calculator. Here with the express checksum calculator, I have the ability to go find a given file. I'll do that on the license.txt. And then I can actually calculate some of the more basic hashes. the CRC32, cyclic redundancy check, 32, MD5, and SHA-1. I could go pick the README file, just pick something else, and see what the hashed result would be. And let me try this executable since it's readily available, and calculate that again. So you can download little programs such as this to calculate the hashed result. So if you went out to download a program such as the Canaan Able example, you could verify that the downloaded version matches the hash that was presented on the website. I've actually seen VMware Server kind of push the idea of me calculating the hash, because when I went to do the install years back, it actually asked, did you calculate the hash? And of course I moved forward, but you could definitely use a program like this to do so. And plus we already looked at Cryptool. And as far as the strength of hashing algorithms, you need a good one. I mean, obviously SHA-1 would be better than MD5, and then SHA-2 would be better than SHA-1. And the strength of the hashing algorithm has a lot to do, I think, with the length of the hashing algorithm. And it has to be more resistant to problems like the birthday attacks with statistical likelihoods, and collision-free, which we saw an example of that. A collision is when you have two different data sources that are input into a hashing function and they produce the exact same hashed results. Just like that divorce document that was talked about earlier, where they were going to split 50-50, and then it was changed to where the wife would get everything. And the idea was she played with it till she finally got it to produce a collision, which would be extremely difficult, of course. The idea, if you use the better hashing algorithms, you're much less likely to have these type problems. And of course, it's going to be much more difficult to crack the hash. The hash is normally considered irreversible. It's considered a one-way. But do realize if it's a weaker hash, it is possible with hacking tools. And of course, the MD5, they were showing MD5 collision creates rogue unauthorized certificate authority. With the weaker hashing algorithms, you're not really going to necessarily have the peace of mind and the sense of security, because you are potentially using a weaker hashing algorithm and it may not be as trustworthy. Now back to the encryption, remember that many systems will use a hybrid. Actually, with SSL and TLS, we have a hybrid approach. Secure sockets layer and transport layer security. Symmetric, remember, is really super fast, but how do we distribute the key? We use the asymmetric, which is not so good for large amounts of data, but quite excellent for dealing with the key exchange because it encrypts the key. So you neither allow for authentication or non-repudiation. So if you put the two together as a hybrid, we get the best of both worlds. And you could use a digital signing to take care of the non-repudiation, which on the other side, who receives your digitally signed document or email would basically be able to authenticate that it came from you. So digital signing, the big word that you put with it is non-repudiation. In other words, with this, if I digitally sign an email and send it to you, the concept is I cannot deny sending that email because I cannot repudiate or argue, because when you look at it, my digital signature is on there. So that's like signing an official document. It's got your signature on there, okay? Now realize when you think of web applications, or such as going to a web browser and going to your favorite bank, or going out there to purchase something on Amazon, or check your email, you may notice it changes to HTTPS. And with that, it is using either secure sockets layer or transport layer security. Realize that SSL is not as good as TLS. SSL started out first, and it does encrypt the information. That's why you see both of them do. That's why you see HTTP with an S at the end of it, because it is encrypting the information. Now we'll find the TLS was definitely an improvement. It actually supported a mutual authentication, or I guess we could say a bilateral connection. The basic steps, it's not something you necessarily have to memorize, but when you look at the SSL connection, I would say kind of looking through some of the main steps here. Server sends a client certificate. Client checks to see if the signing certificate authority is actually one that it trusts, which would be because it's trusted in its browser. And then the client's going to compute the hash of the certificate and compare the message digest as the hash of the certificate by decrypting that certificate authority's public key. And the certificate authority had to sign the certificate. And the client will check the dates on the certificate to make sure they're still valid. It will check the URL in the certificate to make sure it matches the URL that it's speaking with, communicating with. The client will pull out or extract the server's public key from the certificate because the public key would be part of the certificate. It would be within it. The client would create a session key, which is a symmetric key. A session key is only good for that session. It's good for a little while, so it's going to be anti-replay. That's something that you could necessarily record and use at a later time. It's then going to encrypt the session key, which is, remember, a symmetric key, with the server's public key and then send it over. And then the server is going to decrypt using its private key because you need the complementary private key. So when you look at that, you can see that it is a hybrid. Absolutely is a hybrid. And just looking at this kind of summarized, you can actually see that there is symmetric and asymmetric. And they repeat the weaknesses. That asymmetric is not good for a large amount of information. Symmetric is. But symmetric has a problem with transferring the key. Put them together, get the best of both worlds. And you can see when they say encrypted session key, that is the symmetric key. When you see public certificate, public key, that's the asymmetric world. So it is a hybrid. And the session key, of course, is only good for that session. Another secure method dealing with, maybe if you usually would telnet into a router, you could secure shell into a router. You could use something like PuTTY as a piece of software to use secure shell. You could use secure CRT, which is a software package that can be purchased, but it allows you to exchange information using a secure channel between two devices. And again, in the Windows world, and we could still use this, but really we may see this more with devices that are could be command line, such as a router or a Unix or Linux system. And Secure Shell does use public key cryptography to authenticate the remote computer and allow it to the remote computer to authenticate to the computer to authenticate the user if needed. So really, when you look at that, there's a lot of authentication going on with the systems. When you think of Secure Shell, many things are based upon Secure Shell. That is using port 22 actually. And you may see variations of that where you're saying Secure Copy Protocol or Secure FTP. So even when people say, oh, I'm going to FTP into my server, they're actually most likely, hopefully, using a Secure Shell version of it. So as long as they're using the Secure Shell version, they're getting essentially a similar result, but with more security. Okay? So it's really a lot of operating systems. It's not like this is proprietary. Mac operating systems, Linux, FreeBSD, Solaris, OpenVMS. I mean, there's all kinds of versions that you have out there for this. And when we think about VPNs, we have something called IPsec. And IPsec is built into IP version 6. And with the IPsec, it can give you a really nice secure connection for a host to a host. That can be a computer to a computer to a subnet of a particular subnetwork, or a particular subnetwork to another subnetwork. IPsec has two modes. It basically has encapsulating security payload and authentication header. The authentication header only gives you the authentication part and some hashing, the integrity. When you use encapsulating security payload, you get all of the same features plus confidentiality. So the ESP gives you the authentication and the integrity plus the confidentiality, again, encryption. And to work with IPsec, IPsec, it has a internet key exchange. It's a protocol that it uses to exchange the key information. And IPsec can work with a variety of layers of the OSI model, layers 4 through 7. You can see other protocols kind of tied into that relate to this. Then, when you think about security, I mean, when you look at IPsec directly, it is actually a network layer protocol, layer 3. But then when you think about, your other options with security protocols, the SSL, the TLS, all of that, those are really more the ones that spread through the layers. But I could see a combination, really. When I look at these, I could see certain functions that you're still using SSL and TLS, as well as the IPsec, which is actually a little more pure version, layer 3. So hopefully I said that correctly to you, but that's kind of the idea. Because IP is layer 3, IPsec, IP security is layer 3. And IPsec also has encryption modes. We have transport and tunnel. And when you think about transport, it's only encrypting the data portion, which the fancy word for that is payload. It leaves the header information alone, versus the tunnel mode encrypts everything. It encrypts the data, also known as payload, along with the header, header information. So really, the tunnel mode is more secure. Okay. When we look at PKI, public key infrastructure, we are looking at the whole world of having a certificate authority, which is a service running on a server to deal with certificates. We have a registration authority, which can serve as a helper for the certificate authority to do the verification on anybody requesting a certificate to see if they really need one. And we would produce these digital certificates, which have the public key bound to it, from the certificate authority that we would trust. If a certificate is no longer trustworthy, it gets put on a list called a certificate revocation list. And of course, we call this public key. I guess public key enabled applications and services would have to be around to understand how to use the public key. And what's really nice about it, they're talking about allowing for mutual authentication and better encryption levels. The mutual authentication is I trust you and you trust me. We basically authenticate both directions. Now, if we find that there's been some sort of issue where a certificate is exposed to a hacker, then we would need to revoke the certificate and put it on the certificate revocation list so that the software would not trust it. There is also quantum cryptography, also known as quantum key distribution, uses quantum mechanics to guarantee secure communication. With this, enables two different parties, two different people, to produce a shared random bit string known only to them, and then they use this to actually encrypt and decrypt messages. Central problem in cryptography is a key distribution, and your public key cryptography relies on, as they put it, computationally difficulty of certain hard mathematical problems, versus quantum cryptography relies on the laws of quantum mechanics. So there's some hope here. Attack vectors, when you think about attacks and people are trying to figure out passwords, they can try to do words out of the dictionary, thinking that you may have picked one out of the dictionary. They may try every possible combination, brute force. That could take a while. And they can actually download rainbow tables. If you ever Google rainbow tables and maybe put the word free with it, you'll see you can actually download these pre-computed, it's almost like a pre-computed brute force. Everything that we would have gone through to brute force a password, we can pre-compute that and save them as these large tables, and they are really large files, to speed up the password cracking. As far as network attacks, we have replay attack. And the idea of a replay attack is that we could sniff the traffic, maybe using a tool like Wireshark, and we could try to capture anything that might be useful, like your username, your password, token information, or even your tickets from Kerberos, what might be the theory. And the nice thing is some of the protocols are anti-replay, so such as the Kerberos, which they are time-stamped, and so some systems may use in sequence numbers to protect against this. So tickets are only good for a certain amount of time, so they could actually expire and not be used in a replay attack. If you have two people or two computers communicating, you could potentially have a man-in-the-middle attack if an attacker were able to get in between the two communicating systems. And they would have to do, if they were able to take over the session, it would take additional work. But with this, they could actually read the information between the two original computers talking and potentially even change that information. And just lastly, looking at some of the cryptography and cryptanalysis, there's been a lot of cryptanalysis through time, whether it be, maybe classical cryptanalysis where you try to be a code breaker and you look at the frequency that maybe the letter E is used in the English language, and if you see the letter L is used just as much, then you figure L is actually E in your secret code language. And of course, the symmetric world, just a variety of attacks, all trying to break the encryption. Quite a few. Side channel attacks, maybe studying the device, studying whatever you're trying to crack, and just see, just analyze the power that it uses, just get to know it so you can potentially figure it out and break the cryptography, break the code. And of course, also external attacks. Pretty hefty chapter, but hopefully you've enjoyed. And we looked at encryption, we looked at the symmetric versus asymmetric, and we saw the hashing of MT5, SHA-1, SHA-2. We saw that the hybrid was a really great way to go. And just a multitude of attack vectors and methods. And of course, this chapter really didn't get into the steganography, but there was just a moment, just a mention of it. Just remember it was in another chapter and that the steganography is just essentially a way to hide information within another medium, such as a picture, potentially a video, or a sound file.